can look at the recording. And I'm going to try something that I've not done before. I'm going live on Facebook with the class. I've been recommended to do this, so I'm going to try it. And hopefully this will all be good for everybody. So choose where you post on your timeline next. Okay. Preparing live streaming preview. Sorry, I should have done this beforehand, but this is giving Simone a chance to come in as well. And sorry, go live.
Hello?
Anyway. Okay.
Okay. No.
Well,
all right.
What's the story with Simone? We just
she won't. All right, I'll figure it. We'll figure it out, okay?
Thank you so much. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're just beginning our mini course on Tehillim, and I'm going to mute everybody quickly, and then you can all unmute yourself if you want to ask a question or make a comment. And as you know, comments and questions are always welcome. So we decided to begin looking, well, I decided to begin looking at Psalms, Tehillim, in our period between Pesach and Shavuot, in our Sfirat HaOmer, our counting of the Omer, because everybody should say a psalm a day anyway, any day. And in fact, some of you will be aware that there's a tradition to read psalms every day. There are actually two different rhythms that are set up for us, a weekly rhythm. There are some people who read the whole 150 psalms every week, or a monthly reading of the psalms. That's set up for us, but it's always kosher to read a psalm in any situation. And as we're going to learn, there are certain psalms that are appropriate at particular occasions as well. And so I thought it's a beautiful thing for the period of Sfirat HaOmer, counting of the Omer, but it's also a beautiful thing to learn. And while we're in this really strange coronavirus era, a lot of people have found saying psalms is something that is particularly relevant at that time. Sadly, this has not been a time where we've all remained unscathed, and I welcome Rachel back to the class, and we all know that this has been a difficult time, and psalms are seen as a form of prayer, but I want to explain, it's a sort of prayer, but it's not quite a prayer. So here is the problem in terms of what is prayer and how psalms fit into prayer from a Jewish perspective. Prayer, if you try and define it, it's the human response to the divine. It is the human being calling out to the divine. That's a general definition of prayer. But when we say Tehillim or Psalms, which are a big bulk of both our daily prayer as well as our individual prayers and our Shabbat prayers, and we've got Hallel, our special services, you might suggest that because they are in the Tanakh, they are a divinely inspired form of words. So why should you give God back his own divine words? On the other hand, we believe that the Psalms were created by, and here again, this is nothing unorthodox in saying David or King David or an heir of David, somebody who was taking on the voice of David. As you know, there are some who like to hold that David himself wrote all 150 Psalms, but the majority opinion is that David wrote some of the Psalms, certainly those that are written have his name in them, but that others were written by those writing in his style or taking up his message or mode of prayer. And if that's the case, if they were written by human beings, we can say they genuinely are prayer. And what is the problem with praying in somebody else's words? As a matter of fact, for Jewish life, it is preferred that we pray in the set words than in our own words. But when we pray and we want to communicate with the divine, don't we want to say what's on our heart, express our feelings? And this is where the Tehillim, the Psalms, come into Jewish life and play such an important role. Because in reading them, and I hope now in this mini course on them, you'll see they touch at the deep emotions that seem to cut across history, whatever particular place we are in history, and individual circumstances. It's absolutely amazing how the psalmist or psalmists captured the human appeal, what human beings want to say to God. So psalms are very, very beautiful and powerful ways of communicating with the Creator, and they are real prayer. What is in this context, and this is just in brackets, a side comment, there's a big question, of course, whether we can call the Shema prayer, because the Shema is from the Torah, the words of God himself, and giving God's words back to himself doesn't really seem to be prayer. But the Tehillim, the Psalms, are perhaps the most poignant form of prayer we have. And as I said at the beginning, they can be said any time, in any circumstance. I haven't said hello to Lindy. Linda, hi, welcome. So the Psalms are definitely part of what we want to say to God. So if you look at the handout, the Psalms themselves often bear inscriptions or headings. So 13 of them have the word shir. Now, I love the word shir because we know it's a song, but it's such a beautiful concept that a song is related to the word yashar, which means in a straight line, or a flow. Something which is yashar is flow, but we also use the word yashar to mean direct, straight. So we can talk about a shir as coming straight from the heart as well. A shir touches us. I always think of Rav Kook, who said, what is the meaning of Yisrael? Yisrael is usually translated as struggling with God. But Rav Kook says, no, Yisrael is Yashir El. We sing to God. That song is an integral part of what it means to be in connection with the divine. So 13 of the Psalms actually are called Shir. 58 of them are called Mizmor, which means that they used to be accompanied with a musical instrument. And those of you who have not yet been to the museum of I think it's called the Museum of Jewish Music, Hebrew Music, can't remember. There's a little tiny museum, Mandy and I went together some months ago. And at the last stop there, they give you a virtual tour of the Second Temple. And there you can feel and hear the Leviim, the Levites, playing musical instruments. That was part of the temple tradition. And 58 of the Psalms relate very directly to that playing musical instruments. You've got one Psalm, which is called Tehillah, which is actually Ashrei. You probably don't realize that Ashrei is the first two lines of Ashrei, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, are not from that psalm itself. The psalm itself begins with Tehillah LeDavid, Tehillah, which is a song of praise, and all the psalms are called Tehillim after a word used to introduce just one of the psalms. 13 use the word maskil, and that's a very interesting concept that they are part of you might put them as part of the wisdom literature. 6 of them have the title Michtam, which Rashi suggests that it's something that you carry with you all the time. It's something very precious, but it goes with you. Rashi says that these psalms they're about our everyday spiritual awareness, and I think that's lovely. Psalm 7 actually has a crazy word, shigayon. Now, you will know that shigayon in modern Hebrew means madness. So according to Rashi, Psalm 7 means a mistake, but David's admitting that he made some sort of mistake. Or shigayon might have been a type of musical instrument. But Ibn Ezra says something, I think, again, very beautiful, the idea of longing, a yearning for something. Every day we recite Psalm 30, 100, and 145 to 50. We call them the Psukei Zimra, the morning prayer. And
Excuse me.
yes.
Excuse me. Could you please let Simone in now? She figured out. She took care of the problem.
I will admit her, of course.
Thank you.
Welcome to the class, Simone. I'm so sorry that it took you so long to get here. Is she there? She's connecting. Simone, welcome. Yeah, I think you're here now. Now, we are just looking at the introductory handout at the moment. We haven't gone beyond that, so we haven't actually started our looking at Psalm 1 yet. The other note before we begin looking at Psalm 1 is that there are certain psalms that are relevant in certain circumstances. And I've given a list of them, and we are going to look at the psalms we're going to look at are all in one or more of these lists. It's interesting that Psalm 1, where we're going to begin, and I did decide to start with Psalm 1, is the only particular time or particular circumstance that it's mentioned that we should talk about it is at a grave site. And I want you to keep that in mind for the end of our discussion about Psalm 1. But of course, when people are doing their cycle, I don't know how many of you are counting the Omer, Svirata Omer, but it's very easy to do day one. We're all pretty good at day one. For those of us outside Israel, you do it at the second Seder, so that's fine. But as time goes on, it's harder and harder to keep up the cycle. So people who take on themselves to do a cycle of reading of Psalms are very likely to do Psalm 1. It's very widely read, but some of the later ones they might forget or not get to or whatever. So Psalm 1 is widely read, widely known, and one of the beautiful things about it is that it is short. So we are going to be able to, I believe, in the time that remains to us, actually get through Psalm 1 and learn it pretty well. So what I want to do is start by reading it. I'm going to read my English translation that I have here. I'm just using a JPS translation, but I have other translations here with me. But if any of the words that I read now do not appear in whatever translation you're looking at, don't worry, because there's a very good chance that in our discussion of the meaning of the psalm, we'll touch on the translation you have. Okay, so I'm beginning reading Psalm 1, and I want to read the first word in Hebrew, or the first two words, Ashrei ha'ish. Happy is the man who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, or taken the path of sinners, or joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of the Lord is his delight, and he studies that teaching day and night. He is like a tree planted beside a stream of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose foliage never fades, and whatever it produces thrives. Not so the wicked. Rather, they are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore, the wicked will not survive judgment, nor will sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord cherishes the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked is doomed. Okay, short. I'd really like your responses before we look at anybody else's responses or any other commentary. So when you read that psalm, does it teach you anything that you felt you didn't know before? Does it reinforce important ideas for you? Or does it actually contradict, or is it a problem with any of the values or ideas that you hold? Tell me your responses to this psalm when you read it.
My problem with this, and in a lot, not just here, but in a lot of tefillot and everywhere, is between Tzadikim and Rashayim. How do we define someone who is a Rasha, given that one can always do teshuva? How is somebody a Rasha?
Thank you. That is wonderful. We actually are going to read some commentary on that in a moment, but I want to suggest to you this, Sharon. You've touched on one of the key, and this is the point of this whole series of great Jewish ideas. This is one of the great struggles that we don't talk about either philosophy or theology in Judaism. We don't like those terms, but ideas. This is one of the great concepts for Jewish life is there even such a thing as a rasha? We talk, for example, on Yom Kippur, that everybody can revert to being pure if they repent. And we told about before Yom Kippur, the perfectly good are written in the book of life and the perfectly evil are written in the book of death, and the rest of us have to repent. And we're told the rest of us is actually everybody. Nobody's before or after, because there is nobody who's so rasha they can't repent. And then we have Amalek. What is Amalek? So
what's rasha? Sorry, I want
very
to go
evil, bad.
Oh.
Rasha, that bad. Who is the rasha? Who is the really evil person? And they are the wicked person. So Sharon raises one of the key philosophical issues for Judaism altogether, or we can call it theological issues. Is it about, God's relationship to people who are really bad? What does it mean to be really bad? So thank you for raising that, and it is a huge problem. And the question of Amalek is related to that question. Are there people so bad that they are irredeemable? So thank you for raising that. Anyone else comment? Respond.
I was just going to say, in the Aleinu, it says that everyone will repent.
Even the Rashaim, doesn't it?
And will be redeemed. So,
and it says Rashaim, it uses the word Rasha. Yeah.
So it's a tension of dealing with that. This problem of we went through tonight's Yom HaShoah. We know what evil people there are. There are evil people. Maybe they can't repent somehow. They wouldn't know how. I don't know. But there is a tension within the theology of that there are people, that everyone will be redeemed.
Yeah. That is our aspirational paragraph of Aleinu, that the Rashaim will also return. Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, Nat.
Yes. I'm thinking a lot because of what we've been studying in a number of the classes all year long this year, the division of the country into the two kingdoms, and then the continuation of the country being divided between Jerusalem and Galilee. And all the time, the Jerusalemites are considering the Galileans evil, and that even plays out later on in the New Testament, doesn't it? With Jesus being a Galilean, anything good out of Galilee.
There might be an historical context, except that if you believe that David wrote this psalm, and that's a big if, then it's prior to the splitting of the kingdom. And the word Rasha doesn't just begin to appear with the splitting of the kingdom. The word appears earlier. So while, yes, there would have been historical periods where we would have labeled within the Jewish people certain groups. I'm in fact picking up on that idea. We certainly would have labeled the Sadducees at some point, Pharisees, would have labeled them as Rashaim, groups of people. And unfortunately, sadly, today we know that some of us are being labeled by others Rashaim as well. So yes, there is an historical context and sometimes it's group, but I think that within this psalm, if we say that this has a universal application, this is something that is referring to what each of us can do. So following the counsel of the good or following the counsel of the wicked, as it seemed to be the options that we have. So thank you. Anyone else would like to make a comment before we look at other people's commentaries on this psalm?
I think it's important to be in good, to realize what company you're in, that you make your choice of what kind of people you're going to be with, and they will either nourish you in the right direction or not.
Yeah.
And that's an important message also.
I think that is such a beautiful and powerful message, the influence of the people around us on us, and to whom do we listen? And of course, going back to Sharon's earlier comment, and sometimes we might be struggling to know whether the person we're listening to is among the good or among the wicked. And that's an ongoing tension for everyone in every generation. Thank you. Any other comments or responses? Okay, so let's go and start with Rabbi Raymond Apple. I know that Amanda and Melinda, Mandy and Lindy know him well. Simon probably knows him too, but I don't know if all of you know him. He now lives in Jerusalem, but he was the chief rabbi of the Great Synagogue in Sydney for a long time, and during our time growing up, so we know him well. So he's written quite a number of commentaries on the Psalms. He, from time to time, also writes in the Torah tidbits for those who follow. So he makes this, I think, this very nice comment. There may have been a feeling that the book of Psalms, Tehillim, should begin with an aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And I want to remind you that the Torah begins with a bet, and there are reasons given why the Torah begins with a bet, the shape of it facing towards the rest of the Torah, the idea of the aleph represents that which was before creation, and the bet represents that which is creation. Lots of reasons are given, and he says there are Midrash gives it theological reasons. Later on, the Decalogue, the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, begins with the aleph of Anochi. Retelling the history of mankind from the beginning, Chronicles starts with a large aleph. Even if it was considered significant that the Psalter begins with the letter aleph, this doesn't explain why the specific word chosen was Ashrei. And now he draws on an ancient midrashic source, the Yalkut Shimoni. On the first verse of the psalm, David, the traditional author of the psalm, wanted to begin his book where Moshe had left off the Torah. Moshe says, Ashrecha Yisrael, fortunate are you, O Israel, at the end of Dvarim 33:29. And so David begins with the word Ashrei Ha'ish. And again, I want us to think Moshe is addressing Israel, but Ashrecha is in the singular, Israel as people. And David speaks about Ha'ish, the individual person. Ashrei Ha'ish, the individual person. And those of you who've been looking at the weekly parsha with me, remember that we talk about the ish as a person with some sort of status in society. We compare it to Adam, which is man at his simplest level, and nefesh, which is an elevated idea. Here we have ha'ish, and it might relate to what Rachel said earlier about a person within society. That's when the word ish is used, there's already community or society. I'm moving on with Rabbi Apple's reading. However, it seems that there's a more fundamental reason to begin Psalms with this particular Ashrei. The psalm is a wisdom poem. Remember, I mentioned that in terms of some of the language of psalms. And beginning the book of Psalms in this way, prioritizing a wisdom poem, bolstered the case for the Chacham, the sage and the scholar, as against the Chassid, the holy pietist, placing study and contemplation above cultic and private devotions. It may have been part of an ancient struggle to define the ideal Jewish type. This is not necessarily a revolt against religion, but a debate within it. Wisdom and piety are both important, and the question is which has priority. The rabbis assert an ignorant person cannot be pious. Wisdom is the path to piety. The happy man in Psalm 1 chooses a life in the Torah, studying it in both his active and restful hours. He contemplates his law day and night. According to Rashi's commentary, the his refers to the first instance to God, God's laws. But the happy man engages with the Torah and it becomes his own. We presume he prays and follows regular pietistic practices, but his real priority is his study of God's word. So that is the first comment. Well, there's many, many comments in what Rabbi Appel has said, but he pointed out something that nobody actually put their finger on yet. In verse 2, it doesn't just say happy is the person who's not followed the counsel of the wicked or taken the path of sinners or joined the company of the insolent, that it says the teaching of the Lord is his delight, and he studies that teaching day and night. The teaching, the learning is the key here. So any comments or reflections on that point by Rabbi Appel about teaching? Comments or questions? As opposed to being happy because you pray. Remember, the Hasidic movement, which is a much later, it's a modern movement, but it's based on earlier movements where happiness is the goal in itself, joy, simcha. And here he's saying happiness is gained from study. Amanda first, yeah. Andy?
Well, that's what I was going to say, that he's saying that happiness is the outcome of study rather than the goal in itself. It's the study that is the goal, but it's also saying stay on a particular path. Don't go off and deviate on your own thinking will lead to happiness. It will only go through being on this structured, rigorous path.
And that's where we get the counsel and the learning. Thank you. Linda?
Well, the other thing is that that was part of what I was going to say, but the other part is that the translation I've got is says meditates day and night. So again, it's the relationship between teaching and learning, and how you engage in that process. And it seems to me that the term mediate, in a way, relates to the way we're meant to relate to other people as well, the wicked or the wise in this in this psalm. So I like that picks up the two ideas that the way you mediate life is through the way you mediate the Torah, and the way you mediate people is by the way you mediate Torah.
Yeah, very nice. So the Hebrew word hegeh we're going to come to. So I appreciate that, because we do need to look at all those words, what it means. So yes, Hannah first, yes.
Yeah, kind of like a silly little question maybe, but maybe it's not, I don't know. I'm always wondering when a psalm or prayer is written in a man's voice, like I love to do the Kriyat Shema Lemita, and it's, there's so many things that's saying, as if I, the man. How are women supposed to pray that? Are we just supposed to use the words that are there and, okay, I'm connecting with my masculine side?
What you're asking is not a silly question. It's one of the most profound and important questions that I struggle with day and night. You talk about struggle day and night. Yeah. This is an ongoing struggle, and I don't want to be trite at all in the response, because it's a profound question and an important question that I don't think I can answer in this context in relation to this psalm, except to say that, I said Rav Kook takes the idea of Yisrael as Yashir, the singing to God, but I like Yisrael also being struggle with God, because I think that as a woman, sometimes we have to struggle a little bit more when we take the Torah text so seriously. We take it as a divine text, and we recognize, the flaws in the way that we as women can relate to the masculine language. The other thing I would say in his defense, if we believe that David wrote the Psalms, he was a man, so he was reflecting his personal opinion, a personal experience, and we can. I don't think there's anything wrong with when it's not like the Torah. What I always distinguish between Torah and Nach. I believe as an Orthodox Jew, the Torah is the divine word, and I can't fiddle with it. I have to struggle with it. But Nach, the rest of the Tanakh, is a human creation, and therefore I have no problem when I'm saying something to myself from Nach of feminizing it if necessary, or adjusting it if necessary. So I make the distinction between Torah and Nach in my personal life. But there's so much more to say on this, Hannah, that can't be dealt with now. But just simply, it's by far from being a silly question. It's the most profound question and comment. Dov, you wanted to say something. You need to unmute yourself. Unmute, Dov. You're muted. I'll unmute. Okay, there you go.
Any other translation for the word ashrei other than happy?
Yes. And we already had an indication that it's related to the word yashar, straight, and what that means in terms of the commentary we've read so far. We were talking about it maybe a straight melody or a straight song, but let's do it now. Let's look at it now in our secondary sources. And what I was going to say is, for the remainder of this study, this lesson, I've brought direct commentary on the words of the psalm. So I'm going to mute you.
Excuse me?
Yes, Nancy.
I have it as fortunate. Fortunate is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the wicked.
Good. So that would get happy. Fortunate is the man who has not walked. And again, look at the Hebrew. That's the direct translation. Has not walked. It's in the past tense. And that idea that this might be said. I said to you, keep in mind, this might be said at a gravesite, that this is the occasion. At the end of a person's life, you might say, "Gosh, that was fortunate. It didn't happen." But then if you read further on, it said, "But rather he took the teaching of the Lord and made it his delight." He had to do something active. So the question fortunate might sound like it's chance, whereas we've made it
Exactly.
a conscious effort. Sharon, is that what you wanted to say? Or is that...
I was going to say, fortunate suggests that it's something external to yourself that's caused you to be how you are.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say.
And I think there is an interplay between these two things. It's not that a person cannot be fortunate to avoid wicked counsel, but I think that the real meaning here is about the free choice we have. Okay, I'm going back. I've muted you also. You have to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question or make a comment. And
I still have one comment. Can I make a comment?
Yes, quickly. Yes, and then we're moving to
okay, in light of Shoah today,
yes.
I took an issue with the statement about the ignorant can never be pious, and then there's something about the knowledgeable. And Yom HaShoah certainly does show us that many ignorant people were pious.
Thank you for raising that.
Many scholarly people were very evil.
Thank you so much for raising that. I really appreciate that in the context of where we are today, but also in the context of what I said before about Hasidism, that the Hasidic movement in a way responded to this concept that you had to be learned in order to be pious. It was in a particular historical context, but it's also in a theological context, as we're seeing here. So then the question becomes, what does it mean to study Torah? And here I have to repeat an anecdote, which some of you have heard before, but it's worth repeating, noting now. And that is that when Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who was definitely not of the Hasidic bent, but when he was asked by his students towards the end of his life what he regretted in his life that he hadn't done, and they were expecting him to reflect on a piece of learning he hadn't achieved or commentary he hadn't made, and he said he regretted not having gone to see the Alps. And they were shocked. They said, you know, how could that be what you regret in your life as such a great Torah teacher? He said, if you don't appreciate God's creation, then you're not really fully appreciating God. And when some people talk about Torah, they're not at all talking about a text. They're talking about a whole appreciation of everything that God has created, and the fact that you look at the Alps as a sign of the majesty or the divinity and the greatness of God, that in itself can be Torah, a way of learning. So certainly these are all things to keep in mind. But if, as Rabbi Appel says, this was also part of an internal discussion, I would say eternal, internal discussion in Judaism is where we put our effort or our priority, there was still something in that, as we know. And finally, one other thing that I want to say is that in the Torah itself, and in fact it's coming up, it's going to be alluded to in this next week's parasha in Kedoshim, the concept of an older person being wise or having a lot of Torah, with a small t maybe, Torah, just by virtue of their life experience, is also something that is inherent in Judaism. Okay, so now we're going to look at some of the actual words, and I've given you the sources in many cases. This first one, this ancient Hebrew, on that back on the handout for those who are with me there. This Studies in Psalms is by actually a Christian scholar, but he's really good in terms of the language. So when you see that reference there to the ancienthebrew.org, it's a very good website if you're interested in the fine details of words. Okay, so the noun. Now note, ashrei is active, it's a noun. Ashrei, which means to be straight. The Hebrew people saw two types of path, the straight path and the crooked path. The straight path is the shortest distance between 2 points and easy to follow. The crooked path is the longer path, filled with peril and fatigue, and one can easily become lost. The straight ones are those who walk the straight path, and we would say they're happy. You don't get lost. I thought that's a lovely description, especially if you look at the first line in Hebrew, Ashrei ish asher lo halach, who didn't go. So you've got the idea of walking the path all the time. In the Talmud, in Rabbinic Hebrew, Aleph Shin Resh can mean to confirm, attest, or validate it, as in the Talmudic statement, and Havrach mit asher with an Aleph, itasher, yitasher. It's which can mean wealth. So some people say that wealth and happiness are related, because the happy man lives a validated life, a life of substance and activity. Substance doesn't necessarily mean gold in riches, it means a different sort of richness. Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, whom I just mentioned, says Ashrei Ha'ish means that the man strides forward. Again, lo halach, he ties it back to this idea of path. So it's not a passive state, and this is something that we mentioned a moment ago. It's an active faith. Radak, Rav David Kimchi, and I'm going to come back to Radak this week, next week. He's one of the most important commentators on the Psalms. And in fact, Rabbi Appel, I just took it, what I took from Rabbi Appel was just an extract from a longer essay. And I've also attended conferences where he's spoken about Radak and the Psalms. So he is a very important commentator on the Psalms. And he notes something that, again, I have to say, there's so much to learn, so much you can miss. The word ashrei is always used in the plural. How come we didn't notice that before? The reason being that a man is not pronounced happy for one good which is found in him, or one piece of good fortune which befalls him, but for the many things which are found in the men who say of him, Ashrav, he is happy. And David includes in this psalm the law of man and description of what is proper for him to do in this world, but with a reference to the good reward there is for the righteous and punishment for the wicked. But Radak's main point is you can't just say one is happy on the basis of a thing or an achievement. It's, if we take these, what we've learned together, it's an active process that takes in lots of things, and I would emphasize here also your relationships. Malbim, and again, another important commentator, the author of the Psalm, David, is coming to explain the conditions on account of which a person will be a happy person. There's a difference between a happy person and a successful person. Success applies to worldly matters enjoyed in the world, in this world. Happiness is a spiritual matter enjoyed in the world to come. Again, mentioning that this psalm is said at their gravesite. There are three areas of fulfillment: fulfillment of acquisition, fulfillment of the body, and fulfillment of the soul. Therefore, the psalmist explains that he's addressing the happiness of man, happiness that can only attain, which is afforded to being at the level of man. Remember, I mentioned, and somebody else, Hannah mentioned in terms of the problem of using the word ish, but I mentioned it in terms of the way that ish is always in society. Because happiness, the body can be found amongst animals, but a man is a man because of the way we found our society, according to Melvin. In fact, we find various animals that attain their livelihood and sustenance more easily and swiftly than man. As the expression goes, there's none more wealthy than a pig. There are also animals which can accomplish more than man is able to do through use of their body, such as the elephant and the lion. In regards to the senses, an eagle, a hawk, through their faculty of sight. This is not happiness unique to a person, not Ashrei Ha'ish, because Ashrei Ha'ish is the fulfillment of refined character and spiritual qualities that can only be achieved by man. Okay? Now, I'm moving on to the question that Sharon raised for us right at the beginning. He says this: there's a difference between the wicked and the sinners. The wicked sin intentionally and rebelliously, whether in matters between man and God or matters between man and his fellow. That's why the psalmist said the counsel of the wicked, because they're the ones who sin with counsel and intentionally and intentionality. Whereas in regards to the sinners, you couldn't use the word counsel. Look at the text here. It says, who's not followed the counsel of the wicked or taken the path of the sinners. So the wicked, the Rashaim, are different from, in this case, from the Chataim, from those who sin. Okay, so we've already got a distinction. Now I'm going back to Radak, who takes a slightly different view. So Malbim has said the wicked, somebody's wicked when they sin intentionally. Radak says it slightly differently. He says the wicked are those who are feverishly anxious to amass wealth and the desires of whose heart are in this world. And they don't distinguish between right and wrong. For money's sake, they steal and plunder and murder. For the meaning of the word rasha, and this is again a great understanding, is restlessness, as when he gets quietness who can disquiet from Job. And whithersoever he turned himself, vexed, as you see in Samuel, and neither shall violence deliver its masters. So you've got these words of rasha that mean it's something violent and disturbed. On this account he conjoins walk with wicked, and these enjoins counsel, for they counseled the children of Israel to listen to them, and they shew specious counsel to the effect that it's a fine thing to gather riches and be merry. And man is largely deceived in this end, for the good which is visible to his eyes best appear to him, and he does not look to his end. So again, Sharon, going back to your question of who is wicked, according to here at least, and that this is Radak's view only, but he says that wicked are so busy amassing things, and they will turn over the world to amass things, and that's what makes them wicked. And if we look at then his contrast, a man commits sin while his place is at rest, indeed, at work and thought. And it's not a way of walking, but it's occupation. So he is distinguishing as wicked as something very active, as opposed to sin, which you can do less actively. So that's his idea. Any comments or questions on any of this so far? Okay, so now we're going to move on.
Yeah, the
Yes.
issue about the animals bothers me because, of course, we've been taught for all of these eons from Breshit that we are supposed to be the caretaker of the animals, and we're supposed to be the highest in the chain. Actually, in modern animal psychology, we're seeing how much this is an inferior idea. And in the tragedy in Australia, we saw in particular the way that the animals can actually be higher on level than the man.
Yes. So I think what he's saying is, and this is again, remember, we're reading one commentator's interpretation here, but what is being said here is that human beings can be, often are, inferior to animals in many aspects. And they uses the example, the elephant's stronger. But in terms of a spiritual life, this is the point he's making, in the spiritual life, this is something that only the Ish has. So that's his comment. I want to move on to verse 2 because this is something that somebody asked about, meditate, as opposed to the word that I used is studies. And other interpretations are recites or utters. Okay, meditate in his heart, according to Radak. Meditation of my heart in thy sight, for he's already spoken of learning and doing, and now he speaks of the intention and purpose of the heart, that day and night it should be fixed upon the law and the commandments. And therefore an injunction is given concerning them in every action which he shall afford. That avot is avot, pirkei avot. And let all thy actions be to the name or for the sake of heaven. So what we have is, and I need to emphasize this, it ties in with what we were saying before about what study might be. It might not be text-based. What you've done is you've done your study. You study and teaching day and night. You've done your study. The candle has gone out. Remember, in the ancient world, you couldn't study all night because you didn't have light all night. But the candle has gone out. You've finished your textual learning, and now you're integrating what you've learned into you. And that's where the real study takes place. That's where the real meditation or learning takes place. When you finish reading, close the book, now integrate it. And I think this is what Radak thinks is the meaning of this psalm, and therefore it makes it easier for us to put this side by side with those wise people that Nathaniel and others drew to our attention, who may not have had the privilege of much textual learning, but they have the incredible ability to integrate Torah into the way they view the world. Okay, just because of time, I'm going to race through, and then we'll take the comments, and we'll take our further comments at the end, because I'm looking at the clock and we're very short of time. So let me read it through with the text, and then with their hand up, and then come back to questions and comments at the end. So I really loved the idea in verse 3 that it's like a tree planted beside stream of water, which yields its fruit in seasons, which foliage never fades. We could have done the whole lesson just on the image of the person who's not gone astray, like a tree, and what it means. So I've just taken a couple of comments on it. First of all, in the Talmud, it was taught in the name of Rav. The leaves of the tree are a metaphor for the everyday conversation of Torah scholars. Even it deserves careful study. It ties in with just what we've been talking about. You don't, when you talk about the tree itself, that we taught the Torah is the tree of life. But why does it mention the foliage? Because the foliage is what comes from that tree, the everyday life. You take the Torah learning, and it's in your everyday life as well. And even that deserves special learning. From this commentary I mentioned to you before, when we think of a tree, an image comes to mind, a particular image. But when the Hebrews who wrote the Bible think of a tree, an action comes to mind. Now think about this. This is one of the foundational differences between ancient Hebrew and modern Western thought. The Hebrew word etz represents a tree, but more the action of lifting up with support. The function of the trunk and the branches of the tree are therefore to become holders of the leaves or holders of the fruit. And if you look at the word tree, it's related to the word etzah, which is wisdom or advice. And if you look at your text in verse 1, Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach be'etzat harashaim, who didn't go in the counsel of the wicked, and it's the same root as etz. So the repetition is there, again, in terms of the poetry, it's intentionally the same word. And the word etzem means bones. So to think of the tree as the structure or the something which gives opportunity for outgrowth is something very important here. Planting, the word shatal is always translated as to plant. However, the word has the more specific meaning of transplanting, to remove something from an undesirable location to a place in a desirable location. So again, this idea that they are like a tree planted beside the stream of water. The tree has been put. It's an active thing. It wasn't when you don't. It's not just growing in the place of water. It's put there. The fruit. Again, these are such beautiful things to learn. I had to put this in, even though I knew it wasn't directly related to our learning, because I thought we just have to know that. It's fruit, it's also action. The PR, and he shows all the English fruit words that are related to pear, apricot, prune, persimmon, and grape. So again, I thought it was a very beautiful idea, and because PR can be PL, plum, and so on, berry, rhubarb, I just had to bring that. I couldn't resist, and even back the word fruit itself is pre. Okay, season. Again, the tree planted which yields its fruit in its season. The noun et, an appointed time, a scheduled event. It's not, I think that the thing is, one of the true things about wisdom is knowing what to say when, not just what to say. The word aleh, sorry, I've taken out most of the references, but I left in the Strong's. There's a very important concordance which shows all the use of biblical words. That's Strong's, that's what it refers to. You can ignore it. Okay, so the word aleh, leaf, is derived from the word Allah, aleh, and of course, those of you who are looking at the Parshiot or have been looking at the Parshiot, would, as soon as we see the word aleh or leaves, and we think of the oleh, the sacrifice. So maybe the word aleh, leaf, is also related to sacrifice, and the word navel, to degrade, wither or wear out. Okay, verse 4, short but key. Not so the wicked. Lochen Rashem. They're not like a tree. And if you look at the word, because they blow away like the shaf. And Malbim makes the commentary that there is shaf which doesn't blow away because, oh, it's not shaf then, of course, it's attached to the grain. Shaf, by definition, has become separated from the grain itself. And he makes it a community and a leader, that if you stick with your leader, you won't blow away. But I would like to suggest that even though this is not Malbim, it can also be the individual in society, somebody who separates themselves from society can blow away. They don't have that permanence or strength of the tree. I'm just jumping to verse 6 because the Lord cherishes the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked is doomed. And again, the word derech is the same word used. We've got the word derech, halach b'derech, the idea of walking in the way. In verse 1, you've got halach, and in verse 6 you've got derech. It's not the same word, but the idea of way, meaning a well-marked path, which is twice in verse 6, a trail that can lead one to the specific destination. And when I say the same word as used in verse 1, I was referring to, must have been referring to Rashaim, because that's the only same word. Sorry, I made that note too quickly. Okay, but Malbim says, God, who is exalted, gathers the soldiers of righteous to himself, knows them, recognizes them to do good, and satisfies them with his goodness and knowledge and care. And the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord. Of course, this is what is the key to this whole psalm, is that at the end of one's life, God cherishes those who have followed the right way. And this is why we say this psalm at a gravesite. Now, I've just made a final note according to some scholars, and this is it's a very interesting thing. Psalm 1 and 2 were actually one psalm, and Psalm 1 begins with Ashrei, and Psalm 2 ends in Ashrei. But I looked at Psalm 2 to decide, well, first of all, we clearly don't have time to look at it together, but whether I wanted to look at it at all. And I feel the theme is entirely different. So I just think I don't happen to think that that's likely, or we'd have to reinterpret. Now, somebody asked about Dov. You asked about the meaning of the word Asher. And one other note is that the word Ashrei overlaps with the word of Baruch, or blessed, to a great degree. And we do find the words combined in certain contexts. So I've given you two contexts in which the word blessing and Ashrei, Baruch and Ashrei, are combined. We have, in addition to the happy Ashreis, and I've written them at the bottom of the page, other occurrences, we also have a couple of cases of Ashrei in Psalm 137, which are in a very ugly context of smashing babies' heads, actually. So the word Ashrei isn't always written, we don't always find it in the happiest context, but it should remind us of very, very special blessings. I love the idea that it's in the plural, so it gives us a context of Ashrei is a person in his or her fullness and within a context of society. And although I know Mandy probably has to go for the Yom HaShoah, if anybody else wants to make any other final comments or questions, you're most welcome to do so now.
I wanted to ask, I've heard different opinions about saying the Tehillim in English or in Hebrew. Is it is it okay? Does it have value saying them in English?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is an ancient discussion, an ancient discussion,
Okay.
whether you have to say what you have to say in Hebrew and when you have to say it. Absolutely, you should be getting the maximum from saying the Tehillim. That you are supposed to identify with them emotionally. And sometimes for some of us, that happens actually best in the Hebrew because there's something emotional in and of the Hebrew. But sometimes getting the meaning and reading it in English, if that's our first language, is going to be the best way of deriving strength and support and meaning from the psalm. So absolutely can be said in English.
Yeah, just while you're learning the Hebrew, you know, if you're not like fluent yet, then you know, is it better to try to do the transliteration and struggle through it? Or
I would suggest to you that if you're struggling through transliteration, you're going to be so concentrated on that you're going to miss the meaning. And I really I'd be definitely training myself. And by the way, I have to emphasize, Hannah, I'm not paskening. I'm not giving you a lucky ruling of any sort. But this is my view very strongly is that the concept of reading the Tehillim is because David and the other psalmists, or David the psalmist, expressed our true feelings in a way that's better than we can do them ourselves. But that only makes sense if you understand what you're saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, everyone. I hope to see you all. Linda, yeah. Unmute yourself. You're saying goodbye. Okay.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, and I hope to see you next week, Sunday and Monday, Sunday for Parsha, Monday for Tehillim. All the very best, everyone.
Thank you. Toda raba.